People who have called off their wedding, why? Story 1. An old friend of mine called off his wedding because he found out she fucked some dude at her bachelorette party the weekend before. He waited until the day of the wedding to call it off, because he wanted her to have to explain it to her family, most of whom flew into town for the wedding. I was one of his groomsmen, so instead of saying his vows, we all took him out onto the town while in the tuxes. It was still a pretty depressing night out. And he was pretty tore up about it for months. Story 2. I called it off because I realized we weren't ready to make a marriage work. There are a number of skills that a couple needs to have before they can really succeed in a relationship that's meant to last a lifetime. These skills are pretty obvious: compromise, forgiveness, sacrifice, and an acceptance of the things you don't like but can never change. Shortly before the wedding I realized that we didn't have those skills. That made me extremely uncomfortable with the prospect of going through with it. And ultimately, I couldn't bring myself to start something that I knew couldn't last forever. The mistake we made was getting engaged before we knew we had those skills, before we were ready. We gave ourselves a long engagement with the idea that we'd have time to figure out those skills before the big day finally came. But we didn't realize that it put a timer on our relationship, which essentially turned it into a time bomb. When the day came, we were either going to be ready or we were going to have a very bad time. Story 3. My mom was engaged to be married to her high school sweetheart, let's call him Bob. Bob went to her doorstep 2 weeks before their wedding and told her he had joined the military and wasn't ready for marriage. He flew to Germany the next day. Fast forward 30 years and 2 divorces later, my mom was single with 5 children from 2 marriages. She runs into her old high school sweetheart Bob. He is also single and recently divorced. They fall in love and have been together ever since. Spoiler alert, Bob is actually his name. Story 4. My fiancé had baggage. I knew that. As in, I was going to be okay with becoming stepmom to 3 children, a daughter-in-law to 2 crappy parents and sister-in-law to a stupid mess of a woman, and knew that I would be bringing home the bacon. I even bought a house that would be big enough to house him and the 3 kids. But he told me he never married his baby mama, and that he would leave my house at night for occasional night shift work as a cop. I asked to see the court decision regarding the kids, just so I knew what was going on. He kept the first page from me, that read, divorce decree. So when his parents made a second marriage comment, I was thrown for a loop. This was a pretty big thing to keep from your wife-to-be in 6 months. I told him to leave, and he swore up and down that was the only thing he lied about. I called his employer, and it turns out he's not a cop either. So I have no idea where he went when he left the house that I was paying for, and I immediately went to get tested. Story 5. Dated a girl for a while that did this. Turns out she was engaged to him but dating me. We were in university and he was at a different school. I found out when he called to say he was going to shoot me. I guess she'd gone home for the weekend, which really meant going to his school and ending things, and telling him about me. He didn't believe that I had no idea because she wouldn't do that on her own. Story 6. I had an incident like that. Hit it off with a girl at a bar, we had a great evening. She took me back to her place and before we were fully naked her boyfriend walks in, massive guy, could have killed me with his bare hands. Of course, he's immediately screaming and looking at me like he wants to murder me, so I turned and yelled. You have a fucking boyfriend? What the fuck? He put it together rather quickly that I was just some poor schmuck that had fallen for her advances. She was really hot. We calmly talked for about a minute while I was putting my clothes back on after she ran into the bedroom and shut the door behind her. I offered that on any other night, I'd like to be able to take him out for a beer to wash down this terrible situation, but understood that despite the good intentions, he probably never wants to see me ever again. He let me go. I actually would have liked to take him out for a beer after that. Story 7. After a day of trying on wedding dresses, just me and my maid of honor, we met my family and hubby-to-be at my brother's house for dinner. While showing a picture of myself in a dress to my mother, which was on my BFF's phone, she gets a text message from my fiancé. This is odd because I can see him in the next room and I can see my friend in the kitchen. I read it of course and it's a huge confession from him to her, addressing how they had fooled around a few weeks ago and he was really regretting he hadn't taken things further with her. He had no idea I had her phone in my hand. I simply stood up and walked the 10 feet to him, held up her phone and looked him in the eye. The look on his face was priceless, and when I could speak I and New York entire family let them both have it verbally, we're black, so you can imagine that was quite the showdown. Needless to say, I don't speak to either of them anymore. Story 8. My dad called off a wedding before he met my mother. He was with this woman that really pressured him into getting married. Basically she just started wedding planning without a proposal. And my dad let it go too far. One night she and her mother were discussing what food was going to be served at the reception. So they asked my dad what he thought. Roasted chicken or beef? To which my dad replied, I don't care which one you're having, because I'm not going to be there. Story 9. He ran off with another woman. We already chose our venue, that nice spot underneath the slide. Just before the wedding, my friend called me over and pointed across the playground. He was playing tag with Suzanne. I broke of the wedding, and told everyone that both he and Suzanne had cooties. Story 10. We called off our wedding because I had a meltdown over centerpieces. We realized that our priorities were totally in the wrong place and it was becoming more about a wedding than a marriage. We cancelled the wedding and eloped the next week. No regrets. Story 11. I realized that she was more in love with getting married than she was with me. I was her avenue to marriage, she felt that as be a loyal husband and good father. But she didn't care about me more than a friend. Story 12. My cousin called off his wedding because the night before he found out that his wife-to-be was actually a man. He's religious, so this didn't ring well with him. He hadn't had sex with her yet because he's Mormon. To be fair, that guy did have a very feminine voice and was a total crossdresser. It was a total mess, the entire thing. When I first found out I immediately thought that there was Jerry Springer written all over the situation. Story 13. She decided she was still in love with her ex. I had her call my mom and my grandma to tell them she was calling off the wedding. She did it and then proceeded to drive 3 hours to see her ex, who then told her he didn't want to be with her. At least I got back the ring I gave her. I proposed with the same ring my grandfather proposed to my grandma before leaving for World War II. Story 14. Because I felt guilty at what I'd done previously. I was going to be married to a very lovely woman. She wasn't everything a man could have wanted, but she was close to it. I loved her and she loved me, I think. But anyways, I felt guilty because of what I did at my bachelor party. My friends thought it would be a good idea to hire hookers and strippers for the party. I came to the party thinking that I would have no problems resisting the want to have sex with a hooker, but plans usually never go as planned. The start of the party was pretty fun. It was a very naughty party. I shouldn't have been there in the first place. My friends were all single except for one who was having problems with his on and off girlfriend, so they were all in the mood to have some sex with prostitutes at the party. At first I had no trouble keeping myself in check, but as I saw more and more friends going into other rooms with the girls, my hormones kept raging until a prostitute named Crystal started to seduce me. I had had my eye on her the entire night, but that bitch had to seduce me. She even knew that I was the one getting married, some women. She had an amazing body. Not to trash talk the girl I was getting married to, but Crystal was worlds ahead of that girl in terms of physical attractiveness. She had an amazing ass, her legs were great, and her boobs were just right. Her nipples may have been a little big for me, but that's aside the point. She started talking to me and making dirty remarks to me, and eventually I caved in and brought her to a room. I didn't even feel guilty as we were kissing. Her dirty talk kept me going. Oh yes. Name. Treat me like a bad girl. I can still hear her voice in my head. I feel guilty just thinking about this. As things were heating up, she kept screaming that she needed something. I need it very badly. Oh yes. I need it. What do you need? I said. I need about $350. It was around this time I realized that Crystal was 8 stories tall and a crustacean from the Paleolithic era. They goddamned Loch Ness monster had tricked me again. I felt bad for what I'd done the previous night, and apparently one of my friends had told the girl I was to be married to about what had happened. Before she had a chance to break it off with me, I broke it off with her solely because I felt awful about what I'd done.